Rome has been sacked by numerous different groups over the centuries, but only one group set fire to the city itself. This is the story of the night the Gauls burned Rome. The year is 390 BC, and the Romans are at war with the Gauls, a collection of tribes from what is today Switzerland, northern Italy, and southern Germany. The Gauls had previously sacked the Roman town of Clusium, which was only a few miles from the city of Rome. The Romans fled, leaving the Gauls to sack the town of Clusium once more. And then they started making their way towards Rome. And now they were marching on Rome itself, led by their king, Brennus. So on the fourth day, the Roman commanders decided that they had to do something, or the whole city might starve. With their supply lines cut off and their countryside devastated, the Romans had no choice but to surrender. They spared the temples and other religious buildings, as well as anyone who worked in those temples. In fact, they even gave gifts to the Vestal Virgins, the priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. But that is not entirely accurate, because there is evidence that the fire actually started in the market area of the city and spread from there. The Gauls also took all of the gold and bronze statues of the geese, sacred to the god of war Mars, and melted them down to make a giant golden crown for their king, Brennus. So it's likely that the Gauls didn't start the fire intentionally. Instead, it probably just got out of control, given that the Romans were using oil lamps and things like incense to repel the Gauls, who were using catapults to try and break down the city's gates. And this wasn't because they respected the Romans' religion, but because they didn't want to anger the gods and bring bad luck upon themselves. The Gauls believed that their success in war was due in part to the favor of their gods. And they knew that if they pillaged sacred sites, they might incur the gods' wrath. So they left the temples alone, focusing instead on the non-religious buildings where they found much more valuable treasures. And so Brennus and his army entered Rome and began to pillage the city. So Manlius led 8,000 men out of the northeast gate to forage for food, intending to meet back up with the rest of the Roman army later that night. They built huge barricades around the city and gathered an army of 40,000 men under the command of the consul Titus Manlius Torquatus. You see, there was one temple that the Gauls did end up burning down, the temple of the deified founder of Rome, Romulus. Historians aren't sure why they did this, but it may have been because they saw it as a symbol of Roman authority, or maybe they just wanted to desecrate the city as much as possible. Either way, that temple was the only religious building in the city that was completely destroyed. But while the Romans were confident in their defenses, the Gauls weren't going to make the same mistake that the Etruscans had made a generation before them by attacking Rome head-on. Instead, Brennus divided his forces into three, with each division taking a different route around the city. Then he ordered them to set fire to the fields and anything else that might sustain the citizens of Rome as they slowly tightened their grip on the city. But the Romans didn't think much of it. They just assumed that, like all the other invading groups that had come before him, Brennus would be easily defeated. So the Roman Senate declared that he should be attacked and destroyed. Realizing that they'd been tricked, Manlius ordered his men to retreat back to Rome, but it was too late. The Gauls were quick to intercept, and in the ensuing battle, all 8,000 Romans were killed, and with that, Rome was effectively trapped. But when the two armies met at the Allia, the Romans got crushed. As the Gauls approached the city, though, the Romans prepared to defend themselves. And so for 3 days, the Romans held out against the Gauls, but food was getting scarce, and the citizens of Rome started getting desperate. But when Manlius and his men reached the river Anio, they found that a large group of Gauls was already there waiting for them. And as if things couldn't get any worse, another force of Gauls under the command of a man named Camillus arrived to lay siege to the city. While sacking the city, though, the Gauls did something that the Romans never expected. And yet, surprisingly, the Romans' religious buildings weren't safe. And the reason we know this is because the Romans used this event as propaganda to paint the Gauls as barbarians who attacked defenseless civilians and destroyed holy places, and to add insult to injury after looting and burning the city. If you enjoyed this episode, check out the series in the description or comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.